Good evening and welcome to you and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of March 2021. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming here and being a part of this. We've got a really fun book this month. The book is well, you can see it behind me too. I don't know, so I have to hold it up anymore. It's Afterlift by Chip Zdarsky and Jason Liu, or Jason Liu and Chip Zdarsky, depending on how you want to read the title. And we've got Jason and Chip here, which the camera's about to show those. There they are. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
How you guys doing?
Oh, pandemic.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So, this is a good, fun book, and we'll talk about it. But let's talk about you guys first, and talk about comics and your career. My first question always is, I love this question: why comics? Like, of all the things you could be doing in the world, what is it about comics that like lights you on fire and floats your boat, which I guess makes that a Viking funeral? I don't know. But some variation there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, I told you before this that I didn't want to talk about comics, myself, or my career. So I feel like you've totally just railroaded me right now.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, you're a monster. I've heard it, and now I'm experiencing it. That's the comic experience.
It is the comics experience, yes. I'm a monster. No, I am.
I'll let Jason answer.
About Daredevil for this interview.
Yeah. I'll let Jason field this one first because he's smarter and handsomer than I am.
The reason why I love comics, or even like just making comics, is because I just love telling stories, and it's kind of like having your own film production, but instead of like controlling like all sorts of people to like do the casting and stuff, like I have full control of everything, which like that it's a control freak in me. If I want to tell my own story, I have a specific vision and specific way of how I want to execute and deliver telling a story. So yeah, that's why comics all the way for me.
All right.
It's funny because Jason feels like he's like a control freak, and I also feel like I'm a control freak, which is why I like doing comics. So it's a miracle we haven't murdered each other working on a book. We both want to control it to a certain degree. I love comics because I mean, from when I'm drawing them, there's nothing as challenging and as satisfying in terms of art jobs, I think. And before comics, I did a bit of everything. I was a designer for a newspaper, and I did infographics, and I did like oil paintings of people and architectural renderings, like just tons of stuff, animation. And they all have elements that are fun, but comics kind of is the combination of all of them, or it can be anyways. And that's really what I love about it. The fact that you can take all these different kind of disciplines and smash them together and have the added satisfaction of also telling a story with it. I was at a newspaper for about 12, 13 years before I went full-time in comics. And I maybe got like 5 fan letters from the newspaper over that decade.
Yeah.
Because, the artwork in the newspaper is kind of like window dressing in a lot of ways, and it always felt like that to me. And even when I would write an article or create a graphic or whatever, it's like, I don't know, it didn't affect people the same way that comics did as well. So I do enjoy the sense of power over people.
Fair enough. Do you when you were doing things in the newspaper, were you bylining stories and also illustrating the spot illos for them?
It was a job I kind of got right out of college because I went to school for illustration, and it turns out I was the only kid in my class who also read newspapers. So I was nominated to go try out for this job, and the job was basically information graphics, so maps, stock charts, things like that. A horrible thing would happen, I'd have to figure out the steps of the thing that happened and explain it to the reader visually. And I learned a lot doing it. It was a lot of fun. But eventually I just I had the itch to kind of do more. And the one thing about newspapers is they got to fill all those pages every day. And if you can give them the art and the story, and they don't have to worry about commissioning, because
Yeah.
usually you have to commission one or the other.
Yeah.
You're a bit of a godsend. So once I started pitching them kind of humorous information graphics tied to like a holiday or an event, that kind of started my career there, where I started doing stuff like I had an advice column for like 5 years where I'd give terrible advice to people. That was also illustrated. I would do cartoon reporting where I would go to events and sketch things out, interview people, and do it in comic form, videos. There was a lot to it, and kind of all those weird skills ended up translating to comics in a strange way.
Yeah, that's fascinating because it almost sounds like the dream way to prepare for a comics career. You're checking all the boxes of like producing to deadline, focusing on story. It's got to be timely. It's got to be concise. It's got to fit into a frame. And it's all the same things as comics. And I've interviewed probably 250 cartoonists. No one's ever come to it from that route that I'm aware of. I find this kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I know Bendis worked as a cartoonist for a newspaper.
Yeah, okay.
But I would do a bit more than that. I would do a lot of reporting, stuff like that.
Yeah.
The deadline thing is important, but also being okay with edits, which I think a lot of people go into comics, and as soon as an editor, asks them to change a thing or cut a thing down or explain a thing in a script, they're just like, "What? My precious words."
Yeah.
But like I learned that lesson early on in newspapers. Like the first thing I did for them, I remember an editor coming over and being like, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You can't tell a joke over 3,000 words." And he just cut it and he cut it. And I was shocked and horrified.
Yeah.
But he was right. He was absolutely correct. So that prepared me to deal with like Marvel and DC editors and kind of maybe have a better understanding of where the edits were coming from.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Just to tie this one off, did you go to school for journalism, for writing, for illustration? Did you not go to school? Like, what's the path that got you there in the first place?
Well, out of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I took a year of graphic design. Basically, flunked out of that. Took a thing called media arts for 1 week. Dropped out of that. Took art fundamentals for a year, and then did illustration. So illustration was the program that I did for 3 years and graduated from. And Jason, were you in the same program?
Yeah.
We went to the same school.
Same time or
no? Jason's much younger than me.
Well, that doesn't mean anything these days, right?
It's true. Yeah.
Like I went to Sheridan College for illustrations, hoping because I always wanted to do comics ever since like high school. Like I was making mini comics and selling them in the school cafeteria, and hearing that like Sheridan College was a place to be to develop my art, and that's where like they had a great animation program. So I submitted a portfolio for animation and one for illustration. Didn't get into animation, but I got into illustration. But I found that the illustration program didn't really cover comics. They like at the time, like this is like early 2000s, so like they really frowned upon that and didn't think that could be like a career possibility. And like me being stubborn, like I would still make mini comics on the side of my art assignments, and that's when when it came to like third year co-op where I got to like intern. I reached out to Chip's studio mate, Kagan MacLeod, because they were part of this studio called RAID, which stands for Royal Academy of Illustration and Design, and that's where like I met Chip and as well as Cameron Stewart and Ben Shannon and they had a pretty good comic background where it gave me the insight I needed on like how to work professionally in comics.
Yeah.
It's funny, the Sheridan thing. Almost everyone in comics who went to Sheridan has the same story, where we got into the program and we were told to not do comics and not do anything involved fantasy or sci-fi, like anything that could be considered genre, because they wanted kind of like classic illustrators that do stuff for the New Yorker.
Yeah.
And but now
editorial.
now they've graduated enough people that have done well in comics that they've reversed it a bit. Now they're like, "Oh, would you come and speak to the class?" And I'm like, You hated me. I remember you hated me.
Was the focus more on like spot illo, like New Yorker kind of thing, or like advertising, like draw the new Cadillac or what?
All that but comics.
Yeah, it was everything but comics. But the prestigious thing was editorial illustration. If you could have like a New Yorker cover or a Rolling Stone illustration or Wall Street Journal, like kind of the big publications, and that was always the goal. And they drilled that into us, and most of us who graduated were like, that was our pursuit. I only ever broke into kind of Canadian newspapers doing illustration work, which was great. Like, doing art and paying the bills is fantastic. The hustle was never fantastic. And I always found myself just kind of doodling my own comics on the side, just for sanity's sake.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different schools of making comics, I suppose. I mean, more than a couple. But I sort of always wonder about kind of specific drawing craft, illustrative craft versus storytelling and flow, right? Like, so kids who are going to one of the comic colleges, right, they're all learning about flow and how you tell a story, whereas it sounds like what you guys were being taught was much more, how do you render an object? Does that sound right?
Or conceptualizing like a message in one single illustration for an editorial piece. So not nothing like sequential, really. Like I found, like after I graduated, that's like I just dive deep into like understanding comics by Scott MacLeod and like stuff by like Will Eisner. Like it was more self-taught when it came to like learning more about comics than actually going to Sheridan and just learning traditional comic art. Traditional art. That's not comics.
Yeah. Sheridan was great for teaching you how to think, conceptualizing, combining ideas, which is super come in handy, especially on the writing side of things, or doing covers, like for Marvel or DC. Like, instead of doing a literal cover, doing something that has a bit more concept to it, which I tried to do with Spider-Man Life Story. That was like probably my most Sheridan illustration college project for Marvel, for sure.
Yeah. So let's go with you, Jason. The first comic that you did that I'm aware of, that I know of, is Pitiful Human-Lizard, which is a great kind of everyman superhero set in Toronto. Was this the first comic that you did? Was there something before that? You said you did stuff in school. You were selling your own comics.
Yeah, like they didn't really go anywhere. Like, they would only like get like less than a dozen readers or whatever. Or Pitiful Human-Lizard was the one where and this is like after I took like a 2-year break from like not wanting to do comics, to after like going to all these conventions and just trying to sell my small press comics. And then I pretty much applied everything that I learned, and was like, oh, right, I'm just going to give comics one last shot. And I do feel like making a superhero comic, but a more unconventional approach. And yeah, I did a Human-Lizard after being inspired from the Marvel films and going back into like the old Marvel comics, and seeing how like New York is a character in the comics, and I wanted to do that for the city of Toronto. and but my character was not going to be like mighty or incredible or amazing because those have already been trademarks. So might as well just use pitiful and just go from there.
Yeah.
You've got the lock on pitiful, Jason. Good job.
Yep. It really stood out at comic racks because like when you're trying to like sell an indie comic, especially like when you put it on like a comic rack with like the other new comics, and you like I felt that title really stood out, and so like I would have like fans that come to me at conventions like you would find out because you were so curious about that title and then just fall in love with it after the first issue.
Yeah, well, and you also had several covers in there which were very Marvel pastiche, in the same design. You were a Marvel fan when you were a kid, or did you discover that later?
I was like back and forth with Marvel and DC.
Okay.
But it was in like when I was working on Pitiful Human-Lizard, I got really obsessed with like the classic, like Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby stuff. Because back then, like when I was reading comics as a kid, I was like into like Joe Mad when he was working on X-Men and like the whole Onslaught saga and Jim Lee. But I never got into the classics, or I never really appreciated classics until a later age, like 7 or 8 years ago.
Where did you shop in Toronto?
So I grew up in Mississauga, which is like in the suburbs, like 30 minutes away from Toronto. But
I see. Okay,
I would take a trip all the way to Toronto to visit Silver Snail because that was like the place.
Snail, yeah. Right on.
There was a mall. I mean, there was a comic shop in the local mall that was in Mississauga. That's not there anymore, but that was also my go-to. But yeah, the Snail was like, I found that was like the mecca. Like I remember like one high school trip, we went to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and we had an assignment to like study, like we had to pick out like 3 artifacts and like draw them out for art class. So me and my friend, we quickly sketched out 3 artifacts from the museum, and we're like, all right, let's hit the subway and get to Silver Snail, and then we'll make it back in time. And I remember like coming back, like going back on the bus with like my backpack filled with Futurama action figures and some comics.
I love that.
You're such a bad boy. Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
One thing that the Pitiful Human-Lizard made me think of in some ways is Bernie Moreau's The Jam, right? Like I feel like there's a common DNA between those two, that it's an everyman superhero in just sort of modern, contemporary, Canadian city. I mean, I want to say The Jam's in Montreal rather than Toronto, but it's got kind of a. Were you aware of The Jam at that point, or
it became a very odd coincidence, actually? Because the thing was like when I was creating Pitiful Human-Lizard, I was studying up on like the classic Canadian superheroes. So like I was going through like back issues of Captain Canuck, and then also back issues of Northgard. And in Northgard, there were some backup stories of The Jam. But I didn't think that it struck a chord to me at the time. Like I was really just trying to come up with something different and more relatable. Like I want to do like a Toronto Spider-Man, but he's not amazing and pitiful. And I also wanted. I might have been influenced by like The Tick, but I didn't want to be farcical. I wanted the humor to be actually down to earth and relatable.
Sure.
So it was like a combination of so many other things. And then when a friend pointed out to me about The Jam, like I took a closer look. I was like, oh shoot! And then I noticed like some of the the boots were slightly or similar and stuff. Like I saw the similarities, and I was like, oh shoot, like I hope there's not like a lawsuit that's gonna.
No, Jason, I
on me.
wasn't trying to like draw a comparison like you had ripped him off or something at
Damn
all.
you, Hibbs!
No,
It was
kind of
more
curious.
than like, because I'm actually interested in the Canadian character on this one. I have to say because I don't, even though comics are kind of fundamentally a Canadian thing since Joe Shuster and Superman, right? Like legitimately. I don't really think of a comics industry in Canada, even though there's all these people who are Canadian cartoonists. Do you see what I'm saying, right?
We tried.
And so that you both hit upon this kind of a similar vibe strikes me as a very Canadian thing,
And you're going to jail for it.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
I think there were a few times where like I've seen the creator like he would like some of the Pitiful Human-Lizard posts or like comment, and I'll be like, oh shoot, I hope he's not gonna like send me some kind of like warning right after that.
Bernie's a sweetheart.
Yeah.
So then this is my other question because you're both of the age when these things were basically created. Captain Canuck and Northgard, are those actually regarded in Canada as some? Because it always felt pandering to me in the United States, and I never really understood if, I don't know.
That's why I totally went for a different route of like I didn't want to create a Canadian superhero that wore the Canadian flag. Like I wanted to have him be represented of being Canadian by just his behavior and attitudes of just being apologetic and modest. I wanted to fill like the other spectrum of the Canadian superhero roster where they're not all wearing Canadian flags because we already have too many of those, or like even people that even superheroes that are like Canadian stereotypes like Sasquatch or Puck. So when people ask me like, well, why a lizard, and it's like, you don't see any lizards in Canada, and that's why it makes them stand out more. Makes them feel a bit more awkward and out of place, and that's why I did it.
Yeah, and Captain Canuck is not known in Canada. Like it's known amongst like the deep comic nerds, but it's not our Captain America.
Right.
But it's the kind of character that every few years there'll be a newspaper article about like there's a Captain America for Canada, and then there'll be a resurgence of Captain Canuck on some level. They always give it a go, and it never quite works. And I'm sorry to Richard Cumley and the Captain Canuck crew. Like, God bless you for trying. And there's also the thing, like Canadians, like even the idea of like the maple leaf as a symbol, like the Canadian flag didn't even come into existence until like 1967 or something.
Right.
Like it's just not as ingrained as like the American flag. Like even growing up as a kid reading Captain America, I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. But if you show me Captain Canuck, I'd be like, what? What's going on here? That doesn't seem cool. A leaf? Really?
No. And because Jason brought it up, what about Alpha Flight? Like, how is Alpha Flight perceived in Canadian comics culture? Because
this is.
I don't know if this story is true, but Richard Comley, he came up with Captain Canuck, maybe right after the dawn of the Canadian flag. Because that was around like 1977, around Star Wars, when the birth of Star Wars. So he made that character known nationwide to the point where like Marvel like approached him and they're like, hey, can we like use Captain Canuck in Marvel Comics, and Richard really wanted to keep it his own IP. To himself, and rightfully so. He can do whatever he wants with his creation. But Marvel was like, you know what? We're just gonna create our own character that looks like Captain Canuck, and you got Vindicator, and I've heard many stories sitting beside Richard Comley at conventions. So I think it's true. I don't know, but
all right.
Alpha Flight came out like a few years after Captain Canucks, so I don't know.
But did you feel proud as a Canadian that you had your own Marvel team, or?
I'll say that there's obviously a bunch of writers that work for Marvel who are Canadian, and whenever they do like an Alpha Flight special or whatever, everyone just kind of climbs over each other to be a part of it, except for me, and because I just don't get it. I'm just like, what? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that means I'm the guy to write it because I'll just be super irreverent with it. But yeah, it never struck a chord with me at all as a kid. Just, I mean, and that's the thing. I love John Byrne, so I remember like picking up a few issues, and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, they're in Saskatchewan now. That's a place I know, but I've never been to. Like, there was no difference to me, except it was just kind of a bit lamer than the American stories.
Right.
I'm a bad Canadian, apparently.
Well, I'll say as an American, I always enjoyed an Alpha Flight appearance just because it was different. It was an interesting foil. And when Byrne did the Alpha Flight comic, it was cool because he changed shit up. Like, I mean, he killed his lead character in issue 12.
Yeah.
Sorry. But like he was playing with the genre, so it was neat. But yeah. Boy, that went down a rabbit hole. I'm really sorry that we went this direction.
All right. I wrote them once it was like a Civil War II tie-in issue. And it was just an excuse to put our prime minister in it, Justin Trudeau, because his father was in the Alpha Flight comic.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that'd be cool. Have him in there. I had him like boxing Tony Stark. Like it was an Alpha Flight issue in which I had Alpha Flight show up in his office and get pushed off to the side, and then it was all about him and Tony Stark at the end. Because again, I'm a bad Canadian.
Yeah, I like it. Right. So, Chip, let's talk about your early comics. I mean, first off, the nom de plume. I want to ask about the nom de plume.
What about it?
Well, why? What do you and
what are you hiding?
Why are you stuck with it? I guess is also the other thing. Just like is Chip more famous than Steve? I guess
it was a weird thing because it was a bit of a foot race between the two names. I worked for a university newspaper doing production and illustrations, and I did a comic for them as well. It was called Prison Funnies. And it was like a college comic, kind of dark humor. Mm-hmm. But around the same time, I was also doing work for Canadian newspapers. And I'd run into a few issues with doing content for one paper or another that the other paper didn't like. And so I told an editor that I would come up with a pseudonym if I did anything that might, bring some heat to the paper. And so when I did the comic strip, I just came up with a name. Chip, which was kind of based on Charles Schultz, because Chip is generally short for Charles, and Charles Schultz had the nickname Sparky, which is like a child's nickname for a grown man. Mm-hmm. And Chip felt like the same, so I stuck with Chip. And Zdarsky was stolen from a friend's ex-girlfriend. My friend broke up with her over a stupid reason, and I wanted to memorialize their relationship to always remind him of her. Really bad friends. But it was just going to be for that one thing, right? I was just doing this dumb comic strip for a year. But then it just kind of kept going, and I started to kind of promote it online during the Warren Ellis Forum period.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's the internet, so you don't use your real name. So I just used this Chip Zdarsky name. And I kind of developed a character to go along with it. I would do the conventions when I started publishing the comics. And I wear like a cowboy hat and fake glasses and cowboy shirts. It's like this weird Canadian named Chip Zdarsky. And yeah, it became like a shtick. But then when I started to do kind of more real stuff for the newspaper, they started promoting me as like a personality for the paper as Steve Murray. So there was like it was like this weird point where like all of a sudden Steve Murray would get recognized in public for newspaper stuff. And then all of a sudden Chip Zdarsky would get recognized. And it was a weird race between the two. And the line for me was always like, if I did fiction stuff, it was Chip. I did nonfiction stuff, it was Steve. But once Sex Criminals hit, I had to quit the paper. I tried to do both. Like, I was doing Sex Criminals and working at the newspaper full time for a year, which was not sustainable. And I had to make the choice, and I ended up quitting the paper, and basically killed off Steve Murray. So now I'm just Chip Zdarsky.
You were literally drawing the comic and working a regular job at wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
I
I'm
mean,
still doing.
yeah. Jason's still doing it. Jason's much faster than I am, and he works a full-time job.
Right.
Yeah, because I didn't know, like, Sex Criminals. It was done as a joke, really, between Matt and myself, and we'd have conversations where we would say, like, this isn't going past issue 3. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, that's why I'm not quitting my job. Like, this is a dumb comic that we're doing for ourselves.
Yeah.
So once it took off, I was just kind of blindsided by it. I didn't really know what to do because I also love my newspaper job.
Yeah.
And they were very accommodating. Like, they would give me less assignments, and they kind of understood the pressures I was under. And I did a book leave for like a month during that period, so it wasn't completely full time. But yeah, it sucked. Like, quitting that job was extremely hard, even though it felt like the right thing to do because of Sex Criminals.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because the second I heard about Sex Crims, I knew it was going to be a hit just from the log line, right? Like, the log line was so strong that that people were going to buy the first story arc. It
Never felt that way to me because, like, the problem was we didn't know what the book was going to be when we were coming up with it. Like, we'd solicited it as basically a dick joke book. Like, the solicitation copy was just like Sex Criminals, it's a jokey, fun, dick fart, whatever, boob comic. And then we started to work on it, and we realized, oh, it's actually about relationships and mental health. Oh, like, anyone who buys this thinking it's going to be this fun book is going to be blindsided by that. They're not going to like it. Anyone that we want to buy a book about, like, sexual health and relationships isn't going to pick up a book called Sex Criminals. So, like, we just kind of thought we were killing our audience left and right before we even put out the first issue.
But that's exactly why it worked, because the log line is, they have an orgasm, they freeze time, and they rob banks. Like, I can sell that to anybody. I mean, that's,
I know, it's weird,
book, right? Like, they, and then they come back for the second, they go, well, that wasn't what I expected, but wait, I still like it, So that's kind of the way to do it, I think, in a way. The log lines are really important. Like, Afterlift has a great log line, right? It's lift, except that it's the afterworld, right? It's a very simple, clean thing to explain to someone. How much of successfully doing a comic is kind of narrowing your focus on the thing that it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have to distill it. Like, people always talk about elevator pitches, which I guess is kind of the same thing as log lines. I remember Matt taught me a thing. He's like, don't put a hat on a hat. If you've got the idea, don't try and add more things onto it, which, I still have trouble with. I think you're right. It's about simplicity, but it has to be simple enough that you can explain it, but original enough that people go, oh, I've never seen that before. And that's the tricky part, right?
Yeah. But it's also what comics are, I think. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. I mean, to me, the more I talk about comics, the more I come to realize that comics are about reduction. They're about taking an idea and making it sort of not simpler, more digestible, right? And cutting out all the extraneous stuff and just focusing on what it is. Because to me, comics are not, and people are going to get sick of me saying this over and over again, but comics are not the two panels juxtaposed. They're actually the gutter.
The space between.
That's what comics are, is the space between the art where the reader goes, I took idea number 1 and idea number 2 and I put them together in my head and here's what I came up with,
Yeah.
That's the magic of comics to me.
And my problem is whenever I read comics, I just assume during the gutter characters are having sex. So they all get ruined.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's the interview. Thanks very much.
Nailed it.
I don't even know where to go with that now. Let's talk about this book for a minute or five.
Sure.
Where did it come from? How did I gave what I thought the log line was? How did you pitch it? Where did it come from?
Weirdly, it started with Daredevil, which is the book I'm doing for Marvel right now.
Yeah.
We were working on issue 1 of Daredevil, and the artist and myself, Marco, we were having a lot of discussions about color. And he wanted Hell's Kitchen to be blue at night. And I'm like, no, it's got to feel hot. But like the default for a lot of colorists and artists is blue for nighttime. And I kept trying to come up with examples to show him. I'm like, oh, Michael Mann is good at that. Like Michael Mann movies, the night palettes are always like really orange and green. So I sat down one night and I watched Collateral to get samples to show Marco. And then while I'm watching Collateral, I'm just like, oh man, like Tom Cruise is so good in this. Like, because he plays the passenger in the cab, and he's like the devil. I was like, wow, what if he was the devil? And so that was like kind of the beginning. Once I had that, I started to think about like the river Styx and passing from life to death, and then it just kind of like smashed together. And I'm like, well, what's the modern version of that? And the modern version would be like an app-based thing, because no matter like whenever you look at history and like mythology, people always like kind of turn their nose up when people introduce like kind of modern concepts to things like this. But at the time it was happening, they were modern concepts, like putting the coins on the eyes of the ferryman. Nobody thought, ugh, coins were just invented. Like that's so pandering to like the new hot thing, coins. So once I started to kind of combine those things together, I had the idea for it. And I reached out to Jason at that point, but I still didn't have what the theme was and what the story was going to be in the characters. Because you can have all the, the concept stuff, the log line, but unless you have like an actual journey for the character, you don't have a proper story.
Sure.
When Jason started drawing the characters, they came into focus a lot more easily.
Yeah, Jason, you said that you guys were in a studio. So were you in a studio at this time?
Oh no, that was like back in 2004.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
So
Jason was the intern.
Yeah. And then, like after like so like years later, like he like after like, Chip's been successful with like all these like Marvel projects, and I became like a fan of like from far away of like seeing like Howard the Duck and Star-Lord, and while I'm working on my indie Pitiful Human-Lizard comic, then after 22 issues working on my series, I wrapped it up and was like, all right, well, like I don't know what to do for after that. Like I kind of got like a bit jaded from comics a bit, and I was like, yeah, like I was just I just felt lost until like Chip sent me an email saying, hey, would you want to be the artist of my new comic? And I was like, holy shoot, yeah, like, totally. Like I would do anything, sure, yeah, like especially since I've been a fan of his like from afar, and I was like, all right, well, gonna take this. Like I'm sure there's gonna be like so many challenges up ahead, and which there were, because he warned me like, yeah, just to let you know, you're gonna be drawing lots of cars, and I'm like, well, yeah, I know I'm not really good at cars, so I'm gonna just take a whole month just practicing how to draw cars, and he just gave me like just one or two sentences about the story. Janice Chen is a rideshare driver who is used who is used by the devil to transport souls to hell, and so I was not only was I drawing cars, but I was just drawing like different ways of like how Janice would be transporting souls to hell, and yeah, so that was like a lot of fun. But I think I learned a lot more about like firmly what the story was going to be about when I would get the script.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So you guys weren't really developing it together, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like character designs, like I would kind of give Jason what the kind of the concepts of what the characters were going to be, and kind of a rough idea of where we were going. But I was figuring it out kind of as I was going as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm kind of, because of the Marvel stuff, in which you kind of really have to plan things out because so many things kind of revolve around the various titles.
Sure.
I kind of wanted to play it a little bit looser with something like this, which
Yeah.
I'm sure drove Jason a little bit crazy. I know there were a few instances where he'd be like, "Hey, I wish I'd known that sword would have been important in the next chapter. I would have, spent more time on that part." I feel,
Sword.
yeah, I feel guilty about that, but it's also kind of like the way Matt and I ended up working on Sex Criminals. Like we'd have kind of big conversations about stuff, but then I would get surprised by the script, and I would surprise him with the art. Like the way we worked was, he would kind of give me the script. I would read it through. I would laugh. I would cry. I would be surprised, and then I would send him the final comic. Like I wouldn't show him anything because I wanted him to have that surprise as well, not just the dribs and drabs.
Yeah.
So I've kind of taken that over to some of my writing projects as well. There are others. Like I do a book called Stillwater for Skybound, in which I densely plotted it out for the first 10 issues, so everybody kind of knows where we're going within the creative group. But this one was like I kind of knew everything except for the ending, and I kind of had to figure my way there throughout the series.
Yeah. When you make a pitch, particularly with your background as an artist, Chip, are you just painting it with words, or are you also putting in some drawings? I sort of think it might look like this, or is it purely just here's 3 paragraphs of what I'm thinking, or 20?
It's always different. Like sometimes I'll submit character designs. A lot of times on the Marvel or DC stuff, I'll do that just to give people a rough idea of what I'm thinking. Less so for the creator-owned stuff because of the freedom kind of afforded everyone. Just to kind of there's more trust there. Not that I don't trust my collaborators at Marvel and DC, but you kind of don't know what you're getting sometimes. Like sometimes the artist will drop out. You have a new artist, so it'd be nice to have the germ of a thing ready for them.
Mm-hmm.
I made a mistake with my first Marvel book, Howard the Duck, where I had the visuals in my head as I was writing the first issue.
Yeah.
And so when the art came back from Joe Quinones, who's extremely talented,
Right.
I was taken aback because I'm like, that's not how I would have done it.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to like step back and go, oh, but you're not drawing this. And also it's generally better than what you would have done. Like you have to kind of turn that off a little bit. You have to have the visuals in your head just enough to know that you're not asking something impossible of the artist. But you don't want to set yourself up for disappointment by thinking the visuals too much.
Yeah. Are you so this was a digital first comic on Comixology.
Yeah.
And I really fucking hate Amazon and Comixology.
Fair enough.
Just to be honest, how was this? Was this released in serialized by the chapters in the book?
Yes. Yeah. It was released just like a standard comic, month after month, on the Comixology platform. And then, so it was an interesting thing because like it's all kind of experiments. Like a couple of years ago, I told myself that I would kind of test out working with a variety of publishers. So it's been like Comixology and Skybound, Image, DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, like trying to check up all these boxes to see which elements work at which company. And so Comixology was on the list. But what was interesting was the deal with them was obviously digital first, and then they were going to have like a print on demand thing, but that never worked.
Right.
And like technically it didn't work, and they kept trying to figure it out. So eventually they were just like, I think we're just going to do it with Dark Horse, and they made a deal with Dark Horse. I'm like, oh, this is great, like, because I like being in bookstores. Like the digital stuff was an interesting experiment, but you really do miss the people talking about the thing they picked up in the bookstore, which is different than people talking about the thing that they downloaded.
Right.
Um,
I really pay as little attention kind of as I can to digital.
mhm.
But the thing that I've kind of consistently heard from the publishers, right, from direct market publishers, and it's totally possible they're blowing smoke up my ass. But what the thing that I often hear is, no, digital is not. It's not a number of copies that even pays for the production of the work. In most cases, it's after it gets into print that it starts making money. Was that the case with this in Comixology? Do you know, or were you even insulated from that? I guess were they paying you a page rate, or were you
a little insulated from it. So
Yeah.
The way the setup works is because it is done through Amazon. Amazon deals with a vendor. Like I am now a vendor,
okay?
and they pay a vendor. So so we worked out in my negotiations with Comixology. We came on like basically the flat rate for the whole series, and I would get paid in installments, and it's up to me to then pay everyone working on the book.
Right.
Which is where it sometimes falls down for people because especially if you're new to comics, one person getting all the money and then having to manage their friends who are working on a book and watching the funds disappear and the work not come in on time, like that could be super challenging.
That's not fundamentally different though than say the basic Image deal, right? It's generally
except
speaking,
there's no money up front.
right?
I mean, that's
Oh,
the thing.
right.
Comixology would pay us,
Right. I
and
see. Mm-hmm.
and we had it all mapped out, so we knew exactly how to allocate the funds.
Right.
I got really acquainted with spreadsheets during this, whereas
Right.
with the Image, it's like, I mean, it's different for everyone, but on Sex Criminals, we never take an advance, so we don't get paid anything until 3 months after the issue is on stands.
Yeah.
So you have to be you either have to hold down a job, like I did during that period, to kind of pay your bills until money starts coming in, or you have to kind of figure out some sort of advanced strategy, which is a lot harder these days than it was probably back when we were starting Sex Criminals. So
Yeah.
Comixology is like super supportive, and helpful, and everything came out on time, so they were like super grateful. But I don't really see the numbers.
Right.
Like that's the downside. On Image, I see the exact numbers. Marvel and DC, I get enough of an idea. With Comixology, I don't really see the numbers because they have people who are buying the issues, and they also have their kind of unlimited subscription program.
Right.
And then they would have like a sale where it's like 50 cents, or they gave it away for free in the lead up to the Eisners. And also, I think when we won the Eisner for it, as kind of a celebration thing, and it's all kind of promotion for us and promotion for hopefully this physical version of the book as well. Yeah. Then I understand the issues with Comixology and Amazon,
Yeah.
but also like it was a really good experience, and also like I love the fact that the end result was a really good looking spot gloss cover Dark Horse book in the end,
Yeah.
which I'm super proud of.
Yeah. No, I wasn't, and just because I, as a
No.
retailer, have issues with a particular business model doesn't mean that I don't think that. Again, the work is the only thing that matters at the end of the day, right?
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
here it is physically as an object. Let me ask you a question, Jason, about producing work that's digital first. How much are you thinking about the form factor? Because you're drawing. I think at least you're drawing full page, right? Like rectangular pages. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously, people don't necessarily consume it that way, though, because a lot of people are looking on their phones sideways. Does that change the way you think about the page?
Yeah, like before we even started, before I even started like drawing the first comic page, like I was given guidelines on like how to draw for Comixology to fit their interface, and so I was not able to do anything innovative or creative like that would spill outside of a panel, or so even like a full page spread like that was something that we had to try to avoid. So I thought the safest way was just to just focus on just a bunch of rectangles and squares, just have all the images like just all contained in a panel, and I treated telling the story as if we're telling a movie, like just a very cinematic approach.
Yeah.
And which helped a lot since when I was drawing cars, I was just looking at like YouTube videos of like Fast and Furious and a bunch of other like car chases and movies, and as well as Initial D.
Was there a little bit of redrawing or repositioning panels? Because I've spotted at least 3 examples of well, like, I don't know, you can see it on the screen, but like on this page, the car is breaking the panel border. So it looks like if you drew it as a rectangle, somebody had to have moved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I no, I try to try to come out of the panel as much as I could, but still uh, not spill out of the panel too much, where it was
Right.
like crossing multiple panels. If it was just crossing like maybe the panel that would lead into the next panel, I figured that would be
Okay.
Yeah, because the restriction on Comixology is guided view, where it's basically just taking you from panel to panel. So it doesn't want to take you to a panel that has a big diagonal that like leads from another panel, because then it gets confusing for the reader. So breaking out of the panel here and there is totally fine, as long as it doesn't go too far where the guided view has to show you 3 panels at once instead of the standard one.
Right. Well, so I guess this sort of becomes my next question for both of you, just as an intellectual problem, I guess. Like, to me, the page of the comic is a page, and you need to tell something propulsive through the page, and there's a page turn that functions in a way, right? But guided view breaks all of that, right? Like, it breaks the language of the page and the boundary of the page. So how do you resolve that conflict?
Well, as far as page turns go, I just recognize that you can only basically every page is a page turn instead of 2 pages and then a page turn. Like I can't lay out the final print product in my head. And guided view on Comixology is an option. Like I never really considered the guided view when I'm writing the page.
Okay.
Because in times when I've been forced to read on Comixology, I always still just read it on my iPad full page.
Sure.
Because that's the way I want to experience it, and I want to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did it change anything for you, Jason, in terms of how you would tell the story, knowing that at least the Comixology, what they wanted was vup, right, rather than.
Yeah, no, I still drew it traditionally as much as I could. Yeah, I mean, like me as a user of like when I'm reading anything of a guided view, like I find like any panel could be a page turner in a way because you don't know when it's coming really. But I mean, I'm glad that we actually got to see a printed copy, so we can actually see like the proper page turns and the printed copy of Afterlift.
Yeah, it's funny that the restrictions of Comixology guided view, like I probably would have been even better suited to draw because we did sex criminals on an 8-panel grid and a fairly tight 8-panel grid too. Like I don't think I ever did a diagonal panel or anything that kind of broke out into another panel. Like it's turned me into a weird bit of a traditionalist, a formalist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the things about comics, right? Is that the formalness of the page influences how the reader perceives it and makes it interacts with the reader. I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I find when I'm working on the Marvel stuff, when the artist draws a page and sends it in, and the characters are like busting out all over, like a little part of me dies inside. I'm just like, no, keep them in their box. They need to be in their box. Oh my god. The super professional artists who do that do it in such a way that it leads the eye and it doesn't distract. But sometimes like a newer artist will be busting out of a panel that'll lead your eye to the wrong panel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that drives me a little crazy.
Yeah. Are you ever in the position? You're probably not because of the endless, relentless production cycle of a Marvel comic. But are you ever in the position where you can go to the artist and go, maybe you want to think about this because you've broken the planes?
Depends on the artist. There was a title that I was doing for Marvel that had a relatively new artist, super eager, very talented, but the storytelling was needed work. So it's kind of like taking on another job because like all the layouts will come in, and I would go through the layouts and I would tell him what's working and what wasn't working and the reasons why. As long as I have solid reasoning behind it, and it's not just like I don't like how that looks, I'll let the artist know.
Yeah.
But I always do it with a caveat, like if I'm overstepping my boundaries and you don't agree with me, go with God. I'm fine. And sometimes the editor will come in and have their own kind of comments. Yeah, it really depends on the artist and the level they're at, and if they're open to hearing stuff, improving. But it depends on how busy I am too. Like it's taken me a little while to get to the point where I'm just like, we just got to get these books out.
Yeah.
We just got to get these books out.
Well, and it seems to me you're writing a lot of stuff these days. I mean, some months I feel like you've got 4 or 5 comics coming out. It's probably not 5 comics, but
yeah, I mean, my digital whiteboard has 11 titles on it.
Wow.
But some of them are just like, oh, there's only 2 more issues left here, or this is a mini series, or that's a one shot. So it looks overwhelming, but it's not yet. Partly is because like I was drawing sex criminals while doing a lot of writing, and as soon as I finished drawing sex criminals, which itself is a full-time job, I was able to just be like, oh, I can actually write more now. Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
And I definitely bit off probably more than I should have.
Yeah. Jason, how do you work? Are you all digital? Are you physical? Pen and paper? What's your process, brother?
When I was working on like Pitiful Human-Lizard and Afterlift, I was a traditionalist working on comic boards, like 11 by 17, and yeah, just lots of different pens and brush markers. And after Afterlift, I decided to just switch digitally, and so yeah, last year, like all my comic work has been done digitally now, and it's been a learning process. I think I've like each issue that I've been working on digitally, I've gotten a bit more comfortable and familiar with the process where it feels almost close to working traditional. I'm still like trying to find like the right brushes that I normally would use when I was working on Afterlift or Pitiful Human-Lizard.
Yeah, Jason switched digital because he wants that sweet NFT money.
None of that BS. No, but I've saved lots of money on supplies, that's for sure. And the thing is, like, when you worked on like 22 issues of the series, and like I've got like piles of comic boards, and there was conventions where like I'll try to get rid of them for like $20 or whatever, and I still got a big pile, especially from Afterlift, where it's like I just don't have the space for that anymore. And I don't want to spend like $30 a month on supplies. I just want to be simple. Just work traditional and digitally, and just carry my iPad wherever. Like, I would sometimes do my comics at work, like on my lunch breaks. It's just simple. Just open my iPad and I'll just be drawing in the lunch break room.
Yeah. Do you the difference between working digital and physical, are you, in terms of like the thumbnails and breaking it down, is there any difference for you? I've talked to a couple of people who they say that doing digital, you kind of lay out your thumbnails become the final product in a way.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, like when I was working on Afterlift, like I've tried to discipline myself to the point where like the thumbnails would be so readable. And I think it was mainly because like I've been studying a lot of like Leonard Kirk's stuff, artist for Marvel, and like seeing all of his like breakdowns and layouts, like they could be like the roughs, or like they almost look close to like the finished work of a comic. That that was my approach whenever I was drawing on thumbnails. So switching to drawing on my iPad, it's just like I just sometimes don't know when to stop when working on thumbnails, where it actually feels like very tight pencils. Makes it so easy for me to ink them right after.
Yeah. Some people say that all of the work is in penciling. Some people say that all of the work is in inking. Some people, when they ink, it's just a brainless thing. Others, that's where all of the detail is. Where are you in that spectrum?
I think it depends on like what you're drawing in the panel. Like if it's a character, if it's just a character shot and you've drawn that character so many times, like if you do like a pretty tight gesture drawing of that character, you can use the inks to carry all the weight for that drawing. But when it comes to like backgrounds and just specific details that need to be in a panel, that's where I want to be much more clear with my pencils as I can. So when I'm showing it to like an editor or Chip, like they can actually read what they can actually read what they're going to be expecting in the inks.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Jordan tells me we have a question, so we'll put the question up, and it's from Pudrigo, who's always asked good questions. From quote, the anatomy of the page addendum, how much thought goes into writing the SFX into the script? And from the artist's perspective, does the specific special effects inform your composition?
Sound effects is the best part of writing.
Yeah.
I love coming up with and writing sound effects. Because it's such an inherently comic book thing, right? Like no matter what the comic, and you know what style the comic's in, like sound effects always seem to find their way in, and you just don't see that in any other medium. So they're super important, and I quite enjoy coming up with them.
Do you sound them out in your head? How does that work?
Yeah, for sure. Just like, like there's a lot of that in my day, and I don't think my wife appreciates it at all. Like I'm always fascinated by, you know, I'm obviously a huge Garfield fan, like most people, and seeing other translations of Garfield, like letting out a meow, is interesting. Like what another country thinks meow should sound like.
Right.
Like that's where you find the best kind of sound effects, is when you kind of see the translations in other countries and how they imagine these things sound. Because you kind of get wrapped up in the way, like, oh, like a gun goes bang, but the sound effect maybe isn't used
really
in Germany. Like it's something different there, to get that sound across.
Yeah. And Jason, to the second part of the question, how do you impact how you lay out the page and what you draw based on those sound effects?
Yeah, so this was like the first time I actually hand drawn the sound effects, because like before Afterlift, I'll just use Adobe Illustrator and like find the right fonts and just position it in a certain way. But like as long as I try to capture the motion of the sound effects on the panel, that's like one of my main concerns first, and then like sometimes like I'll go through like I'll go with like my good standby font that I normally would draw in, which is like a very like Thrasher type of like font, which kind of has that brushy edge to it, as opposed to like sometimes like the bold, like outlined letters. Sometimes I just go for like even like this the simple like sans serif, just my own handwriting when it comes to like a click or like any very simple small noises. And I think that was just apart from like Adrian Tomine, like when he like went with soft sounds.
If it's something bigger though, if it's like a room in a panel where a car is going, do you think about the placement of the word picture first or the picture first, if that makes sense?
I try to find like a harmony with both. So I think there might have been like some scenes where like the car was like zigzagging along the street. So I would try to capture that movement of the car with like the actual like room onomatopoeia. So yeah, like yeah, you can see like some of the trail of like room, like as it's trailing off to follow the car.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Yeah.
One of the things I would generally say about comics is that they're good at showing motion from moment to moment, right, from panel to panel, but things like car chases are really, really difficult to pull off in comics, right? Over a sustained period of time, right? You can see motion from one panel to another, but over a length of time, it seems harder. Am I right or wrong on that? Was Chip a dick by giving you a script that was mostly car chases?
I warned him. I
mean, it definitely made me a better artist. I became a better artist from it, and I knew going into it like I didn't have like a technical illustration background, so I was not gonna like overthink like the technical aspects of drawing a very tight car, because especially when you're drawing like just like a very tightly designed car, like in a comic page, it could just come off very static. So like I wanted to draw it as a character and like give it some movement. So it was more like drawing like an R-rated version of Cars. Like
that's a really interesting way of putting it. I like that. Yeah. And so Chip, when you're writing these scenes, particularly because you have a background as an artist and you understand how to break down a page, I'm I've certainly talked to writers who are not artists who sometimes make silly mistakes in what they write, like they expect the artist to be able to produce.
Yeah.
Knowing that car chases are difficult, how did you approach this in the script?
I just whipped it off.
Okay.
No, I mean, like I knew Jason was up for it. Jason's extremely talented, and it's like I said before. Like I always try to make sure whatever I'm writing is something that I can conceive of drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I definitely try to make it a point to not put something in the script that was impossible to draw.
Right.
Yeah, and drawing cars and car chases are tricky. A couple of years ago, Sean Gordon Murphy did a Kickstarter for his book, which was just about drawing cars and why he loves drawing cars and kind of tips and tricks. And I found in my own art, like, that was pretty invaluable. I don't know, Jason, did you ever pick that up?
No, I only just saw some of the samples that you shared with me. I was mainly just studying like Initial D and just YouTube car chases.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but again, YouTube, the difference is going to be that the cars are in motion and that there is actual motion, whereas you can only simulate motion in comics, and you've got to always distill it to the sort of essential image to communicate the idea. That's why I love comics. I'm terrible about asking these questions because I'm not an artist, and so I have a really hard time framing the right way to say the words that I see in my brain.
They're the basic ones that everyone knows. Like there's speed lines, there's kicking up dust. I've drawn things where cars are kicking up dust in areas where there probably shouldn't be any dust. Right. But because it's a comic, you can get away with it. There are definitely tips and tricks that you probably actually do know. Like I think if you sat down to draw a comic, you'd be like, oh, okay. Obviously, I add these lines, I kind of draw these cars at an angle to make them seem more dynamic.
Yeah, that's generous for you to say. I doubt I could draw stick figures, my friend.
You've consumed these for so long.
I do, but it's not my skill set. It's not how it's not how my brain works. I interpret and analyze it better than I could actually execute it. That's I think the thing.
But so sometimes when you're looking at like an action pack, like a car chase scene, and especially when like there's like how many frames per second, and when you take one of those frames and you'll see like the actual car form will be a bit stretched here and there, just from the motion of it. And I mean that's another nice cheat to do when you're trying to express motion, is try to like go for that effect of like when you're taking a picture of someone that's in mid sneeze, but it's like a car just zooming by.
Yeah, I've recently been doing a podcast with my friends where we read a different book of manga every week or a different series, and I always knew that Japanese comics were really good at motion, but like now that I'm really diving into them, I'm amazed at like how American comics kind of need to catch up a little bit in terms of kind of dynamic motion. Like, I just read one with like a volleyball scene that was like the most exciting thing I've ever read. Like, just like so many fun little tricks and ways to convey motion and action. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a way, they're designed to be consumed differently. In a way, right? Because they're generally produced in anthology magazines and you're reading them really quickly. Whereas you know, the way that we produce comics with the little 22-page pamphlets, it you want a little more density to the page, I suppose.
It's weird because it's both shorter and longer because there
Yeah.
are, you know, the kind of the collections, the way people consume them in Japan, like, yeah, okay, it's like a little 10-page chapter or an episode. But also they have series like Lone Wolf and Cub where it's like it's two characters over like 100 pages just standing there with swords,
Right.
ready to strike the first blow. Like they know how
Right.
to like tell long, expansive stories,
Yeah.
but also those kind of quick episodic bites.
That's a really interesting point too, because it's not just that they understand how speed and motion happens, but they understand how stillness happens. That I think is actually really where American comics have fallen down. That you know that I can think very clearly of 4 and 5 page sequences in Lone Wolf and Cub where it's literally just a leaf slowly falling down while they're staring at each other and about to strike, and they're not striking, and there's all this tension, and you can feel that they're about to strike, but what actually happens is nothing. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's the rapid production pace too, to be able to do that kind of thing, because like most North American artists don't work with assistants. That's one thing. Don't have a studio system, and so you know if we're still just producing a page every day or two, it's hard to justify like, all right, this year all my work is going to be about two people standing there with swords. You know, it becomes a little tricky.
Sure.
But I love it, and I wish I kind of had the time and the ability to create work that had that level of stillness, like because the North American shortcut is just the photostat panels, right? Like that's the stillness of a character just like not moving, where they just like repeat the panel,
right?
Which is usually just a gag.
Yeah. You said earlier that you made a really conscious point of trying to work with a bunch of different publishers and a bunch of different systems and ways of making comics. Have you come to a conclusion after this experiment, or it's still probably an ongoing experiment, of what kind of a process works best to make the best kind of comics?
It's kind of having the freedom. It's weird because the balance is what system gives you the freedom and the support to make comics.
Yeah.
Right. But also where you can make a living.
Right.
because those two sometimes don't go hand in hand. You know, Image is obviously the best kind of deal. There are flaws in the system, which is the fact that Image doesn't make a lot of money off the books because the artists and the writers do, right? The creative teams do. And because Image doesn't make a lot of money off the books, the system of support is stretched really thin.
Yep.
And you kind of have to accept that going into it. And you also have to you basically have to just give them the book every month, like the whole thing. There's nobody here designing it, doing, you know, arranging with the letterer and the designer and the colorist. So that gets really hard. Like I ended up, I came up with Stillwater in 2017, and I was like, do I do this as an Image book? And I was like, I don't have the bandwidth. Like I just didn't have the bandwidth. I was still drawing Sex Criminals and like doing the Marvel stuff. I'm like, how would I possibly do this? And that's why I brought it to Skybound, because I knew the editor there and I knew they had a system. The trade-off, I don't own it.
Right.
They own it.
Pretty big trade-off.
It's a big trade-off.
Yeah.
But I get, you know, profit participation, and I get a good page rate. So hopefully that, you know, that works out okay for me in the long run. Maybe I'll kick myself in a couple of years.
You're in the position where you have one of the kind of example Image books of you guys clearly are making money off Sex Criminals. You're, I'm assuming, making a whole lot of money off Sex Criminals. You know, not Kirkman money, but you know, you're doing pretty well off that book. And then you'll have another book like, I don't know, Capterra, let's say,
Yeah.
which probably sold significantly less, and you may not have even earned out, the monies that got paid out, right? Is that a more or less accurate assessment of the?
I still made more off Captara than I do off Marvel or DC work. Like,
Wow.
That's
Okay.
the thing, and Kagan did as well. Like,
Yeah.
that kind of fell apart mostly due to the fact that comics are hard, and Kagan was really struggling when I gave him the script issue 6, and a couple of months leads to 4 or 5 months leads to like a year, and it's like, well, do we
Sure.
put out issue 6? How do we figure that out? Because that's the downside to Image is no one's banging your door for the
Right.
product.
Yeah.
Like, it's up to you to deliver. Whereas at Marvel and DC, hey, if you don't deliver those pages in time, like, they're just not going to hire you again, and that's like a huge weight on you.
Mhm.
I've seen some really, really tense, like, down to the line production nightmares working for Marvel and DC that, like, stress me out unbelievably, that you wouldn't have working in the Image system. Because if you blow the deadline, the book doesn't come out. All right, okay, we'll do it next month. You're harming yourself greatly by doing that.
Yeah.
So that's also the trade-off. So back to the Skybound, like, I brought it to them in 2017, but the Skybound system is such that they really like to bank scripts.
Yep.
And so I wrote 4 scripts before we even talked about artist.
Mhm.
And at some point, I couldn't even conceive of the characters. Like, I was so used to seeing
Right.
the work being produced that I just like, we need an artist, because I don't even know what these characters look like. Like, this is all just like a conceptual nonsense to me. So we brought Ramon in, and then it's still another year before we actually solicited it after that.
Right.
Issue 1 came out in like September of this year, and I came up with it in 2017. Like, it's a long time. That's the downside there too.
I genuinely
Whereas,
thought one of the stronger first issues I've read of a debut series.
oh, thanks.
I'm not just blowing smoke. Like, I was generally like, what's going to happen next? I'm really curious. So.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It's such a weird thing because I wrote it in 2017. I was promoting it in 2020. I'm just like, I don't remember writing this. Like, it's such a weird problem to have. So, like, the flip side to that is Comixology, because of the nature of the digital platform, we would do it and it would come out like almost immediately.
Right.
Like, you don't even have to wait for the printing on something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was funny. Just the idea that we conceived of and put out 5 issues of Afterlift before issue 1 of Stillwater came out, which was conceived far before Afterlift. It's kind of wild. So yeah, I've been working with different companies and finding their strengths and weaknesses, and in the back of my brain, I'm kind of trying to figure out what the ultimate company would be.
Yeah.
Not that I'm about to start a company.
That's sort of the question I was asking. Like, and I don't want you to call out one company or another. That wasn't the point.
No.
Of that. I just, because you're working in a lot of ways that you have an insight here that I think many other people are not in an opportunity to have that same insight.
Yeah, no, I'm super privileged too to be at this position where I can kind of approach companies, and I'm not necessarily ruling out the red carpet, but they're having conversations with me.
Right.
And I've talked to Boom, I've talked to Oni, on top of the other publishers to see what their deals are as well. And like, yeah, it's fascinating. And I like, if I had the time and the inclination, I would create a new company based on the information that I've been gathering. But I can barely put out books. Oh, Jesus,
it'll happen.
Yeah.
It's always the creative conundrum, unfortunately, to succeed in comics, you not only have to be good at craft, you have to be good at business. And
one of the great things that happened doing the Comixology book is the fact that Jason's editor, Allison O'Toole from Pitiful Human-Lizard, we brought her on board to project manage and edit Afterlift, and she's fantastic. And so once that project was over, I've hired her to be my project manager, editor on all of my kind of creator-owned books, which eliminates the problem that I was having originally, which was like, how do I manage all this stuff at Image? I'm like, oh, turns out you pay someone to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So that she's made my life and Jason's life a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, nice. Now, Jason, one of the things that I don't even remember who told me, but when I said to someone I was interviewing the two of you, they're like, "Wow, you're interviewing Jason. He's like the nicest guy in comics."
Really?
I have heard this from more than one person, in fact. So, why do people think that?
Yeah, what's up with that? Why am I not the nicest guy in comics, Jason?
Yeah, well, Zdarsky.
I don't want to I just don't want to start fights like. Like I don't want to be involved with the beef that Chip and Ryan Stegman have. I don't want to. I want to be like the Swiss of comics in a way, where you'll see me at a convention and you'll be welcomed like Switzerland.
But deep down, you have nothing but undying hatred for most people, right? I'm assuming.
I mean,
at the very least, you're collaborating. I just try to avoid
that and just focus on the positive side of the comics industry.
Now, someone told me that are you involved with the local Toronto conventions as well?
I help run the Mississauga Comic Expo. So the city of Mississauga, which is operated by my employer from my full-time work, which is the Mississauga Library, and every year we would have our own convention, and thankfully because I've been doing conventions for 8 years, even more if you count the stuff before Pitiful Human-Lizard. I've just made so many contacts where I can just reach out to friends and go, hey, would you want to be a guest at my event that we're running? So we've had some very phenomenal guests. We haven't had Chip, we had Ryan North, Jamal Campbell, who's killing it with Naomi. Who else? Sam Meggs we had last year. We had Steens. Jillian Tamaki last year, and I feel like especially now that with the pandemic, last year we've switched to doing things virtually, where we don't have to worry about paying for people's hotel or flights. We just ask them if they would like to talk for an hour for a flat rate, and that's how we were able to get people from out of Canada, people in the States, and that's what we're going to continue doing for this year, actually.
Yeah, I always demanded a hotel, even though I lived half an hour away.
I would recommend you stay at the hotel in Mississauga, the one hotel that's beside our shopping mall. That's made the city famous as the 6th biggest mall in Canada. Or the 5th biggest mall in Canada.
Woo! Good stuff.
Yeah, that hotel is it's very, it's rotten.
I like it.
Let's start. Okay, if you're into it, I'll keep that in mind when you're back in Toronto.
All right, perfect.
We'll still do the thing virtually, but I'll
mix it up.
We'll pay for your stay and. Novotel.
I can't wait to get back to in-person events, man. Because usually the way we used to do these is we have a studio audience here, and the people are asking questions live here in the studio, which is so much nicer. It's studio. We're in the store. What am I? Studio. Speaking of questions, Jordan tells me that we have one more. Is that a thing? Yeah, there it is. What was the manga with the volleyball scene? Inquiring minds want to know.
It's an upcoming episode for Way of the House Husband.
Oh, cool.
Which, spoiler for the episode, is my new favorite comic.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's so well drawn. It's just, it checks all the boxes. It's great.
That's Allison's favorite manga as well, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how many like funny volleyball manga series there are, but I think she's in love with maybe all of them.
That's good. And we have one more. Jordan says we have one more. Here it is.
All right.
Dale Connor. Jason, what's a hero for our times? What kind of superhero do you think we need right now?
You better say
Oh,
me,
man.
damn it. You better say me.
I mean, in comics or in real life? I mean, in real life, it would be Barack Obama.
Nicest guy in comics, Jason Liu.
In comics, yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, the thing is, I'm gonna be biased because I feel like I want to get back into bringing back the Pitiful Human-Lizard, especially like with what's going on, like in the news these days. Like especially since Pitiful Human-Lizard or the Human-Lizard, he is an Asian superhero.
Yeah.
And I thought like when I created this character, like I wanted to kind of fight off all the stereotypes of what people expect an Asian superhero would be, and because we're just not a monolith, and so this is like one type of experience, and that people can hopefully connect with, and when I was doing the last issue of Pitiful Human-Lizard, and like so much of Toronto has changed since I've started the series, where I tackled like a lot of pretty like relatable stuff that happened in the news in Toronto, where it's like, you know what, like this is like he's not fighting supervillains anymore. He's like just fighting like racists that are putting like just racist flyers on like in the streets of Toronto and stuff like that. And it's like I feel that like he should make a return, because like there are a lot of like villainy that's happening in the city of Toronto, especially. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but like I feel like, man, like the ultimate villain is our mayor.
Wow.
Shots fired. But yeah, I mean, like with how he's treating like the homeless in our city, and just pretty much like, you know, like we're like Human-Lizard would be the one, like he would be with them trying to you know, protect the shelters that they've made for themselves, while like the villain in this comic or in real life is the one that's just destroying their shelters. Yeah, that would be the hero of today, is helping the people that are oppressed right now.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned anti-Asian violence, which is certainly a thing in the last couple of months, and particularly this, you know, yesterday, if that's what the story ends up being.
Half year.
Yeah. No, I know. And so I mean, because I know that that's a thing in the United States. Is that equally a thing in Canada? Because, you know, in the United States, we had our president going China virus, like just fucked up things, like egging on that. Did you have that in Canada though?
Not not the same amount as the States, but I would say maybe like a tenth of what the States experience. Like I remember even like the eve of the pandemic, like the like seeing the fear of some people like uncertain if they want to go to like a Chinese restaurant or not, and it's like, guys, it's like that's not how you get it. And it's, yeah, I mean, like in Canada, it's I mean, you know, you do have like we do have Canadians that were or that are supporters of Trump, and I guess because like they're just much more louder and obnoxious. It feels like there's so many of them. But like there's a lot of I mean I'm always like worried about my parents at times, and yeah, they still live in Mississauga, and thankfully like it's a very diverse city, and like there's so many like safe places that they can go, like to get groceries and restaurants, like where they don't really experience that kind of hatred, as opposed to like parts of the States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not right for anybody to experience that, and that's just it really disturbs me that I don't know, that people are just so fucked up. It constantly freaks me out. Looks like we lost Chipper there. Maybe he'll be back in a minute or two. So you want to do more? You want to get back to Pitiful Human-Lizard? Is that the plan for the future, or?
I was thinking like maybe just something strictly to do online. Okay. And like it's gonna be probably the same model of what I did with like the very last issue, where which you can find on my website, jasonlou.pb.online, where like I'll post like a one page like gag strip a day on my social media, and I would also format it for people's viewing pleasure on my website. And so I was thinking of doing that. And you know, if I make enough pages, just like that last issue of like maybe 25 or so pages, I'll self-publish it as its own thing and sell it at conventions.
Yeah,
I miss conventions.
me too, man. Is there? I mean, is the distribution system open to you, Jason? When you do these issues, can you get them distributed through Diamond and things like that, or is it just not a happening thing?
It's, I mean, like the access to Diamond, it is attainable, but like when I first self-published my comics, like I was doing like pretty fine, like just going like door to door to every local comic book store around Toronto, or just like the greater Toronto area, and
Sure.
like I've sold like maybe like 3,000 copies of issue number 1 on its own. Like I went to like two like
through by
like
you you going around to stores, you've sold 3,000 copies that way, or
going to stores, also conventions as well. Conventions.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay. Yeah.
But also like it got to the point where like it like got a lot of like Toronto press, where like my comic was even added to like a university syllabus. So like the requirements were like you had to buy an issue of my comic. So I would, you know, like go to I would work a deal out with the Beguiling, which is another fine comic book store in Toronto, and they would buy like hundreds of copies to sell to the students. So yeah, that's how I got rid of a lot of them. And then after that, I moved to like a publisher that dealt with all the publishing and distributions of Diamond, so I can just focus on the creator aspect.
Yeah. Just because, you know, getting the book out to the market is kind of the most important part of this. Not the most important part of the step, but it's a really important part of the step. I've always liked the comic, but it never had a terrific amount of distribution. So so let's maybe wrap this up. I have kind of two questions that are usually the wrap up. Let's go with the easier of the two, which is, what do you want to plug? You guys got something you want to plug that you really like? Not enough people are looking at this, or just what you got coming next, or what do you got? Jason, you go first.
So I've been working on this comic serial this comic short serial for Razor Blades, which is this horror anthology that's put together by James Tynion Four and Steve Fox. I started contributing to it in issue number 2, and I'm working along with Alex Pecknittle, who's done stuff for like Red Fork and Giga, and yeah, we're working on this little slasher saga going on for 4 issues.
Nice. Mr. Zdarsky, is there something you'd like to plug more than anything else?
I'm always just thinking about whatever's out this week. This is always on my mind. Which, in shops today is the Daredevil hardcover, Volume 1, which I'm enormously proud of, and Stillwater Volume 1 and trade paperback, which I'm also enormously proud of. So yeah, go get them, everyone.
Yeah, especially go buy Stillwater. I mean, buy Daredevil too. Daredevil's a really good book.
Daredevil, yeah.
Buy the creator-owned book. Because, like I said, it was genuinely the best first issue I've read in a long time, and I read a lot of first issues. So
I really appreciate that. Thanks.
That hook is, by issue 2, it was shit. No, just kidding.
I just dropped the ball.
Okay, the other question is, this gets watched by a lot of people who want to make comics of their own, who are either interested in the craft, interested in how it goes. If there was one piece of advice that you wanted to give to an aspiring creator, whether it be writing, whether it be drawing, it could be something physical, it could be something emotional, it could be something spiritual, what would be the one piece of advice that you would hand to an aspiring creator? Jason.
There's so many. I think I would probably go with treat every issue like it's your best comic, or maybe even your final comic, in a way where like you have this mindset where you got to like pour it all in there, like no matter what project that you're working on. Even if you're like working on like a story that you might not be into, like try to find a way to really be into that story, and like there's times where like I've been able to like switch my attitude and really love the story that I initially was not crazy about. You just got to find that passion, or like just treat it like it's like your best portfolio piece.
Nice.
It's kind of like a fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, also you only get one shot, so you got to give it your best.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chip, what do you got for us?
So much. I've got so much for you, but I think the big thing for writers is learn to draw. And my big example of that is the writer-artist Ray Fox, who didn't know how to draw, and he wanted someone to draw his comics, and he couldn't find anyone, so he taught himself to draw at like the age of 30. And the first thing he did was a self-published thing called Nemavor, which he showed around, got into the hands of a Vertigo editor, and the Vertigo editor went, "Wow, this is a great story. Your art's not that good, but it's a great story. We're going to publish it over here with a new artist." And that's how he got to start. And then he kept drawing, and then he produced like some really beautiful books, and he continues to do that. And I think at the very least, a writer who learns to draw will better understand comics. Yeah,
very much so. And speaking of him, one story just came out in a beautiful, brand new hardcover just today. So you're timely as well. You're also looking at the new comics wall.
He used to come by the studio back in the early 2000s, just to kind of show us his work, and we give him like some suggestions and critiques, and we were all like, he's not that good, but good for him for trying. And then he just kept getting better and better. Like it's like anything else, right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of
roundabout
the
way of me saying you should
the
learn.
formal language of comics. That's why I love formalism. It's I don't know. It's something powerful in comics, and really only in comics in the way that it is. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, gentlemen, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us and talk about comics and just sort of babble on about making comics. It's the coolest thing, and I have so much admiration for everybody who does it, and I really admire you guys. And I really liked this book, that book that's all around me. This was a lot of fun, and even though it was digital first by the devil, the product is really terrific and is worth your reader time, you sitting at home. So if you have nothing else that you want to read, you should get that. If you buy it from us, you'll also get this really swank Chip Zdarsky drawn a plate that both of them signed. It's hand signed and drawn by Chip. Maybe the only Zdarsky Afterlift drawing, maybe?
It is. You're correct. Exclusively for Comic Experience.
Very good. Very good. So if you buy one through our web store, which Jordan might put up on the bottom of the screen, maybe he doesn't have it. It's fine. You'll find it. Go comicsexperience.com. You'll find it. But you can buy the copy and you'll get a book plate with it too. So that's great.
Awesome.
Next month's book, I don't think I have formally announced this yet. Next month's graphic novel of the month club for the month of April, we've got Barry Windsor Smith coming in and talking to us about Monsters.
Whoa!
A book which is 30 years in the making. This is a photo stat of it. We don't even have the real copy of the book yet. But ooh, Barry Smith! I'm so excited about Barry Smith. Oh my God! Not next. On Sunday, we've got the Kids Club. The Kids Club. We are talking to Scotty Young and Humberto Ramos about Strange Academy. So that'll be a great conversation. And then for the rest of April, we not only do we have Barry Windsor Smith, but we're talking to Neil Gaiman about Sandman, Preludes and Nocturnes for the Classics Club. It'll be, in fact, this is Neil Gaiman, Karen Berger, and Paul Levitz, and we're going to be talking a lot about sort of the foundation of Vertigo and the comics, making comics in the 80s and 90s, and how that's different than today. I think it's going to be a really fucking good conversation. And the next Kids Club is Seekers of the Awedo, which is by Ni Jun, who's a Chinese artist. We're not going to have an interview with him because he doesn't do interviews, but this is like, just, you can kind of see this is a really gorgeous book that the kids are gonna fucking love. So I won't swear when I talk to the children, but that's that's the lineup for the next couple of months. So if you like this thing, hit that bell, join the club, sign the thing up. There'll be another blurb at the end. I just want to go back and say once again, thank you, Chip, thank you, Jason, for this book. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. You put up the wrong title credit because that said Klaus Janson, by the way.
But always thank you to Klaus Janson. Always.
Thank you, Klaus Janson. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank Kat and Zoe for being my awesome staff and keeping the store going. I want to thank our sponsors at The Beat for being our sponsors. I want to thank the members of the club who are what keeps the store going these days. And above all, I want to thank Chip and Jason and every creator out there who makes comics, because comics, man, that's what it's all about. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So we'll talk to everybody next month, okay? Or Sunday, depending on what you do, okay? See ya. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.